A silver cuff link shaped like a tiny wolf was sitting in the butter dish when I came home, and for several seconds I simply stared at it while cold air poured through the open kitchen window and pushed the curtains against the sink. It didn't belong to me. I had never owned cuff links, much less ones dramatic enough to look like costume jewelry for a nightclub owner. And my wife, Lily, had no reason to keep a man's accessory tucked beneath the glass lid of a dish we used every morning. I set my laptop bag beside the refrigerator without making a sound. Somewhere above me, one of the old floorboards creaked. Then came a low burst of laughter, quickly smothered, followed by the rhythmic squeak of our bedroom ceiling fan. The house smelled wrong. Beneath the familiar trace of Lily's lavender candles was a heavy cedar and tobacco cologne, expensive and aggressive, the kind of scent that entered a room before the man wearing it did. I had left my design studio in downtown Minneapolis early because a pipe had burst 2 floors above us, shutting down the building. Lily believed I would be presenting concepts to a hotel client until at least 7. It was barely 3:30. I moved toward the staircase, and each step gave me another piece of evidence. A charcoal overcoat lay across the bench near the front door, still dusted with melting snow. One black leather glove rested on the 3rd stair. His partner was on the 7th beside a man's belt. Higher up, I found a white dress shirt with one silver wolf cuff link still attached to the sleeve. By the time I reached the landing, my heart was striking so hard that I could feel each beat inside my gums. My hands had gone cold, yet sweat gathered beneath the collar of my sweater. I didn't need to open the bedroom door. The discarded clothing had already written the story from the entrance to the 2nd floor, one careless sentence at a time. But there are moments when knowing and seeing remain separated by a final thin wall, and some damaged part of you still hopes the wall might protect you. Mine didn't. I pushed open the door and saw Lily on top of a man I recognized from the photographs on her medical school's website. Dr. Cameron Price, 38, married, associate professor of clinical anatomy, and one of the faculty members responsible for evaluating the students competing for prestigious residency recommendations. My wife froze with both hands pressed against his chest. Cameron turned toward me, and even in that instant of panic, I noticed a small scratch beneath his left eye and the silver chain he wore in nearly every faculty photograph. A half-empty bottle of champagne stood in an ice bucket beside our bed. My pillow was on the floor. Lily's wedding ring sat on the windowsill. Nobody screamed. That was the strangest detail. The room became so quiet that I could hear sleet tapping against the glass. Cameron reached for the sheet, and I said, "Don't." My own voice sounded calm enough to belong to someone watching the scene from the hallway. He stopped. Lily whispered, "Caleb, I can explain. You have 30 seconds to put on clothes and get out of my house," I told Cameron. "Anything you leave behind becomes mine." He started babbling about a misunderstanding, but I picked up his phone from the dresser and held it toward him. 25 seconds. He dressed with the frantic clumsiness of a man escaping a fire. He pulled on his trousers without underwear, buttoned the wrong buttons on his shirt, and nearly fell while trying to force his feet into polished shoes without socks. Lily wrapped herself in the comforter and kept saying my name. Cameron reached the landing before he realized his coat, belt, and gloves were scattered downstairs. He retrieved them while I followed several feet behind, not because I planned to attack him, but because I wanted to see which vehicle he entered. A black Audi sedan was parked across the street beneath a bare maple tree. I memorized the Minnesota plate as he drove away. Only then did I notice our neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, watching through the gap in her curtains. That detail would matter later, although not for the reason you might expect. My name is Caleb Morgan. I was 30 years old and worked as a senior visual designer for a Minneapolis branding agency, where I spent most days deciding how companies should present themselves to strangers. I understood color, hierarchy, negative space, and the way one carefully chosen image could make a lie feel trustworthy. Yet I had failed to recognize the false design of my own marriage. Lily was 25, 6 years into a demanding medical program that included her undergraduate requirements and early clinical training, and we had been married for 2 years after dating for 3. I paid the mortgage on our narrow house near Lake Nokomis, handled most of the bills, cooked when she studied late, and told everyone her ambition inspired me. She wanted to become a surgeon. I wanted to be the husband who never made her choose between her marriage and the life she had worked for. Standing in our living room with another man's cologne still caught in the upholstery, I realized she had interpreted support as permission to stop considering the person providing it. I went back upstairs and found her sitting on the edge of the bed in my robe. She had put on her wedding ring. That small performance made me angrier than if she had remained naked. "How long?" I asked. "It wasn't supposed to happen. That is not a measurement of time." Her eyes dropped to the floor. "Since October." It was February. "For months." I asked whether she had slept with him in our house before. She said no, then changed it to twice, then admitted she couldn't remember whether it had been 3 times. Each answer arrived only after the previous lie became unusable. She insisted Cameron had not promised her academic favors. He was merely somebody who understood the pressure she was under. She claimed I had become emotionally unavailable because of my workload, even though I had reduced my freelance projects to make dinner and quiz her with anatomy flashcards. When I reminded her of that, she said my help often made her feel indebted rather than loved. I want you to imagine the precision of that reversal. The very things I had done to lighten her burden were lifted, sharpened, and handed back to me as reasons she had betrayed me. For several minutes I could barely breathe. My vision kept catching on objects that no longer seemed ordinary. The framed wedding photograph above the dresser, the blue blanket we bought on our honeymoon in Duluth, the stack of index cards on which I had drawn silly cartoons to help her remember cranial nerves. I felt nausea climbing into my throat, but underneath it was something steadier. Observation. A designer's habit. I noticed Lily's phone on the nightstand and the fear that crossed her face when she saw me look at it. That told me the affair contained more than she had admitted. I did not demand the phone. I did not threaten Cameron's career. I did not punch a wall or give her a dramatic speech. Instead, I said, "Pack enough clothes for a week and stay with your friend Nora." She began crying harder and asked whether I was ending the marriage. "I'm deciding what reality I'm in," I said. "You've had 4 months to adjust. I've had 15 minutes. Lily reached for my hand. I stepped away. She packed slowly. Expecting me to soften each time, she folded another sweater into her suitcase. When that didn't work, she shifted from apology to panic. She said medical school was already overwhelming, that public scandal could destroy everything, and that Cameron's wife could not find out because she was emotionally unstable. I asked how she knew anything about his wife. Lily hesitated, and I filed that hesitation away. Before leaving, she said, "Please don't do something you can't take back." At the time, she thought she was warning me against violence. In truth, she was warning me not to remove the comfort she intended to return to. I locked the door after her and stood alone in the hallway. The trail of clothing was gone, but Cameron's cologne remained. I opened every window despite the freezing temperature. Then I photographed the bedroom, the champagne bottle, the cuff link in the butter dish, and the damp mark where his coat had rested. I saved the images to 2 cloud accounts and emailed copies to myself. On the champagne bottle, I found a receipt tucked beneath the ice bucket showing it had been purchased at 2:41 that afternoon with Lily's debit card. That made her claim that the encounter just happened particularly weak. Nobody accidentally chilled champagne before an affair. The next morning, I called an attorney named Daniel Kim, who had handled a contract dispute for my agency. He referred me to a family law specialist, Marissa Cole, and by noon I was sitting in her office beneath a framed photograph of the Stone Arch Bridge. Marissa listened without interrupting, then explained the practical limits of what evidence could accomplish. Minnesota was a no-fault divorce state. Proving infidelity would not guarantee me the house or punish Lily financially. However, documenting marital money spent on Cameron, protecting my separate assets, and establishing the timeline could still matter. She advised me not to empty accounts, destroy property, contact Lily's school in anger, or make threats. "You need to decide whether you want justice, leverage, or revenge," she said. "People confuse them and usually end up damaging themselves." I answered that I wanted clarity. It was true at that moment. Revenge came later. Following Marissa's instructions, I downloaded 3 years of statements, changed passwords on my personal accounts, froze a supplementary credit card, and inventoried the house. Lily and I had a joint checking account for shared expenses, but the mortgage and deed were in my name because I had bought the property 11 months before our wedding using savings and a modest inheritance from my mother. Lily had contributed toward utilities and groceries when her schedule allowed, but most of her tuition was funded by loans and help from her parents. I transferred exactly half the joint balance into a new account and documented every cent. Then I examined the statements. For hotel charges stood out. So did expensive dinners scheduled on evenings when Lily claimed she was studying at the university library. The most interesting payment was a recurring $165 transfer to a woman named Natalie Price. When I searched the name, I expected Cameron's wife. Instead, I found his younger sister. She owned a small photography studio in the North Loop and specialized in professional portraits for doctors, executives, and university faculty. Lily had paid her 3 times. I couldn't understand why until I accessed a folder on our shared desktop labeled residency branding. Inside were portraits Natalie had taken of Lily, personal statement drafts edited by Cameron, and a spreadsheet ranking students in Lily's cohort. Some cells included private faculty comments that no student should have possessed. Cameron wasn't simply sleeping with my wife. He was feeding her confidential academic information. That discovery transformed the affair from a private betrayal into potential professional misconduct. But I still didn't contact the school. Not yet. I needed to know who Natalie was in relation to the secret and whether the payments were legitimate. I emailed her from my agency address, introduced myself as a designer looking for a freelance medical photographer, and asked whether she would meet for coffee. She replied within an hour. We arranged to meet Thursday afternoon at a cafe overlooking the frozen river. Natalie was 32, tall, dark-haired, and dressed in a camel coat with an old film camera hanging from one shoulder. She arrived carrying a portfolio and spoke confidently about lighting surgeons without making them look like criminals in a documentary. For 20 minutes, I treated the meeting as professional. Then I placed the silver wolf cuff link on the table. All the color left her face. "Where did you get that?" she asked. "Your brother left it in my house while he was sleeping with my wife." Natalie stared at me, then closed her portfolio. She did not defend him. She whispered, "Lily." I nodded. Natalie leaned back and looked through the window at the river. After a long silence, she said Cameron's wife had left him the previous summer, although they had not yet finalized their divorce. He told his family the separation was caused by his workload and his wife's jealousy. Natalie knew he dated, but she had no idea he was involved with a student. The photography payments had been for legitimate sessions, and Lily had told her the portraits were a surprise gift arranged through Cameron's mentoring program. "If the university learns about the spreadsheet, he's finished," Natalie said. I asked whether that troubled her. "It should," she replied. "But mostly I'm thinking about how many times I helped him clean up disasters while he promised each one was the last." There was exhaustion in her voice, the kind that comes from loving someone who repeatedly converts love into labor. Before we left, Natalie asked what I planned to do. I told her I hadn't decided. She slid the cuff link back toward me. "Keep it. He'll care more about losing the matching set than he cared about leaving it in your bedroom." Over the next 2 weeks, Natalie became an unexpected source of information. At first, our contact stayed practical. She confirmed Cameron's schedule, explained his consulting arrangements, and warned me that he was already telling colleagues I had discovered an emotional friendship and behaved unpredictably. Then she forwarded a message he had sent their mother claiming Lily had pursued him and that he was trying to end the relationship when I attacked him. I had never touched him. Mrs. Alvarez's doorbell camera showed him leaving my house uninjured at 3:43, adjusting his shirt while walking normally to the Audi. My own phone location and messages supported the precise timeline. I saved everything. If you have ever been betrayed, you may recognize the strange temptation that followed. Facts began accumulating faster than my emotions could process them, and gathering them gave me the illusion of control. Every screenshot felt like another brick beneath my feet. But evidence does not automatically tell you what to build. It can support an exit, or it can become a wall you hide behind while imagining ways to hurt the people on the other side. I was approaching that choice when Lily asked to meet. We sat in the back corner of a restaurant near Minnehaha Falls, far from anyone we knew. She looked exhausted, with no makeup and dark circles beneath her eyes. She said she had ended the affair. Cameron had blocked her after accusing her of damaging his career. Nora no longer wanted her sleeping on the couch, and Lily's parents had asked why she wasn't living at home. She had told them we were taking space because of my stress. I asked whether she intended to correct that lie. She started crying. "I want to come home." The words landed exactly where she expected them to. For 5 years, I had been the person who solved problems when she became frightened. She reached across the table and said she finally understood how much she loved me. She wanted counseling, transparency, and another chance. She offered to leave the medical program if that was what I needed. For one dangerous moment, I pictured letting her return. Not because I believed her, but because the familiar shape of our life was still sitting empty inside me. Then I asked, "Did Cameron give you confidential information about the other students?" Her fingers withdrew from mine. "What are you talking about?" "The spreadsheet." She went completely still. Instead of answering, she asked whether I had been searching her files. That was my answer. I placed cash beside my untouched drink and stood. Lily grabbed my sleeve. "Caleb, please. I made one terrible mistake." "No," I said. "You made hundreds of decisions, and now the man you made them for has abandoned you. You don't want me back. You want the consequences to stop." She stared at me as though I had become somebody she did not recognize. Maybe I had. "You cannot come home," I told her. "My attorney will contact you." I walked outside into falling snow and ignored her when she followed me onto the sidewalk calling my name. That should have been enough. I had rejected her, protected my house, and collected evidence capable of ending Cameron's career. A clean legal exit remained available. Then, 3 nights later, somebody smashed the windows of my car and spray-painted the word abuser across the driver's side. Cameron had made one mistake when he arranged it. The vandal he paid wore a distinctive jacket, and the security camera above the neighboring pharmacy captured enough of his face for Natalie to identify him as a former patient transport worker Cameron knew from the university hospital. The police took a report, but the footage was too distant to prove who had ordered it. Cameron called me the following morning from a blocked number. "This can still get much worse," he said. I recorded the final 17 seconds before he disconnected. That was the moment I stopped planning only a divorce. I began designing something for him, quietly, patiently, with every hour of my own whereabouts accounted for before the first piece moved. The mistake Cameron made was assuming revenge had to look like anger. Anger was noisy, impatient, and easy to trace. Design worked differently. A good design guided people toward a conclusion while making them believe they had reached it by themselves. And once I stopped reacting to Cameron's moves, I began studying the structure that held his life together. His faculty biography gave me the polished version. Respected anatomy professor, guest lecturer, medical education consultant, and co-founder of a small company called Clinician Forward, which sold residency preparation packages to medical students. The company's website displayed photographs taken by Natalie and testimonials from students at universities across 3 states. Cameron claimed his service provided interview coaching and personal brand development, but the confidential spreadsheet on my computer suggested something more valuable was being sold behind the language. I searched corporate registrations, archived versions of the website, professional forums, and cached student reviews. 3 former clients had complained anonymously that Cameron seemed to know interview questions before they were asked. One wrote that he had guaranteed a specific rotation placement in exchange for a $6,500 premium advisory fee. The reviews had vanished from the current site, but cached copies remained. I created a folder containing every public record and sent duplicates to Marissa. Then I called Natalie. We met after closing time in her photography studio, where enormous white backdrops hung from the ceiling and framed portraits covered the brick walls. Cameron's face appeared in several sample photographs near the entrance. Natalie took them down before I asked, I showed her the vandalism footage and played the blocked call. "That jacket belongs to Owen Barker," she said. "He used to drive patients between buildings. Cameron helped him after he got caught stealing medication." I asked what kind of help. "He convinced a supervisor not to report it if Owen resigned. So Cameron kept the favor. Cameron keeps everything." Natalie sat on the edge of a posing stool, arms folded tightly. When I explained that I wanted to expose Clinician Forward from the inside, she shook her head. "Send what you have to the university." Then he claims the files came from a jealous husband who invaded his wife's computer. He'll say Lily fabricated them to impress him or misunderstood what she saw. "What are you suggesting?" I told her I wanted access to the company's upcoming invitation-only seminar at a hotel near the Mall of America. Natalie had photographed the previous events and still appeared on the approved vendor list. If she declined the next booking and recommended a replacement photographer, that replacement could document Cameron's presentation and collect whatever he distributed to prospective clients. Natalie stared at me for a long time. "You already have someone?" "I know a commercial photographer named Simon who owes my agency a favor. He won't steal anything or break into a device. He'll photograph what happens in a room he's hired to photograph." "And where will you be?" "Presenting a campaign proposal to 47 people in Chicago." My agency had scheduled the trip months earlier. Flights, hotel reservations, client calendars, building security records, and a room full of witnesses would establish that I was 400 miles away when Cameron's company unraveled. The plan required no forged documents, no hacking, and no physical harm. Cameron had already created everything necessary to destroy himself. I only needed to arrange the lighting. Natalie did not agree that night. She called the following morning and said, "I'll recommend Simon, but I want one condition. Nothing gets altered. Nothing gets planted. If Cameron goes down, it has to be because of something he actually did." I promised. That condition suited me perfectly. Over the next month, Lily communicated only through our attorneys except for several late-night emails I did not answer. She apologized, blamed stress, apologized again, and described Cameron as manipulative. She said she now understood he had exploited her admiration and feared he had used other students too. In another message, she wrote that our marriage had been beautiful until she lost herself. She never once said that passing around private academic evaluations had been wrong. Her regret remained centered on what she had lost, not what she had done. Marissa filed the divorce petition and secured an agreement preventing Lily from entering the house without advance notice. When Lily finally collected the rest of her belongings, I arranged to be at the office while a neutral third party supervised. She left her anatomy cards on the kitchen table with a handwritten note. "You were the only person who ever believed in me before I achieved anything." That sentence stayed with me for days because it was probably true. It was also not a reason to take her back. Belief given freely does not create a permanent obligation to tolerate betrayal. Let me pause here, because refusing Lily was more difficult than planning anything against Cameron. People imagine rejection as a triumphant moment when the betrayed person finally discovers strength. Mine felt like refusing shelter to someone I had once promised to protect. I had to remind myself that she was not locked outside by one impulsive mistake. She had spent 4 months carrying another man's clothes through our home, removing her ring, chilling champagne, and accepting information that could damage classmates who trusted the integrity of their program. Love could explain why I grieved, could not require me to volunteer for another betrayal. The Clinician Forward seminar took place on a Saturday in March. Cameron had reserved a ballroom and 2 meeting rooms under the pretense of hosting a networking workshop for 24 medical students. Each student paid $900 to attend. Simon arrived at 7 that morning with 2 cameras, portable lights, and written instructions from Natalie explaining the photography package. I boarded my flight to Chicago 30 minutes later. At 9, I walked into the conference room of the Langham Hotel, placed my phone face up beside my laptop, and began presenting a rebranding proposal for a regional restaurant group. Every moment of my day was documented without my having to manufacture anything. Simon photographed introductions, staged networking exercises, and Cameron's keynote. Cameron eventually distributed dark blue folders labeled Confidential Advancement Profile. Inside each folder was a customized ranking of residency programs, likely interview questions, notes attributed to faculty selection committees, and the names of people the student should contact privately. Some pages displayed university watermarks. Others contained internal comments about students who were not even attending the seminar. Cameron had become so comfortable operating without scrutiny that he presented stolen information as a premium feature. Simon photographed the open folders exactly as they appeared in students' hands. Then Cameron did something we had not anticipated. During a smaller session, he offered 6 attendees access to a placement assurance tier, costing an additional $8,000. He explained that his relationships allowed him to shape which applicants received favorable attention. One student asked whether this violated school rules. Cameron smiled and said, "Rules are mostly branding. What matters is who controls the interpretation." Simon's camera was recording video because Cameron had asked for promotional footage. The sentence was captured clearly. That afternoon, while I answered client questions in Chicago, Natalie visited Cameron's office using a key he had once given her for emergencies. That was the secret part of the retaliation, the only step that crossed from observing his misconduct into deliberately forcing it into daylight. She did not break into anything. She did not take his computer, touch his files, or enter a restricted university building. The office belonged to Clinician Forward and was leased partly in her name because Cameron's credit had been poor when he founded the company. As a legal colleague with property stored inside, she had the right to enter. On a shelf behind his desk sat 27 unopened seminar folders identical to those Simon had photographed. Natalie moved them to the center of the conference table and opened the blinds. Then she anonymously tipped a local education reporter named Elise Hart, telling her that documents relevant to academic corruption were visible inside a commercial office from the public hallway. Elise had already been researching private residency consultants. She arrived with a photographer, saw university-marked evaluation sheets through the glass partition, and contacted the university for comment before publishing anything. The university sent its compliance officer, who called Cameron and asked permission to inspect the materials. Cameron, convinced refusal would appear suspicious, came to the office and agreed. By evening, the folders had been formally photographed, catalogued, and secured as part of an internal investigation. Natalie never removed a document. She merely arranged Cameron's own inventory where the right person would ask him to explain it. I landed in Minneapolis shortly after 9. 2 detectives were waiting near the baggage carousel. For a moment, seeing their badges made my legs feel hollow. They asked whether we could speak privately. Cameron had told investigators that I possessed confidential student files, had threatened to destroy his career, and might have planted materials inside his office. I gave them my attorney's number before answering substantive questions, but I voluntarily showed my boarding passes, hotel confirmation, presentation schedule, and location history. 47 people had watched me work in Chicago while the folders were being discovered in Minneapolis. Airport cameras showed me leaving before Natalie entered the office. My home alarm had remained active all day. I told them truthfully that I had never been inside Clinician Forward. "Did you know those materials existed?" one detective asked. "I found a spreadsheet on a computer I shared with my wife and gave it to my attorney." "Did you arrange for the reporter to visit the office?" "No, that was also true. Natalie made the call. They released me after 22 minutes. No arrest, no accusation, just questions prompted by a frightened man trying to redirect attention." Cameron's version deteriorated within 48 hours. The university confirmed that several documents contained authentic faculty notes. Metadata showed that files had been accessed through Cameron's account over a period of 18 months. For students from the seminar surrendered their folders and payment receipts. Simon provided his unedited photographs after receiving a lawful request, and the promotional recording captured Cameron offering his placement tier in his own voice. He was placed on administrative leave. Clinician Forward's accounts were frozen while investigators examined possible fraud and unauthorized access. Then Owen Barker, the man who had vandalized my car, was arrested for an unrelated burglary. Facing new charges, he offered information about Cameron in exchange for consideration and admitted receiving $700 in cash to damage my car and make me appear dangerous. He also turned over their messages. The spray-painted accusation had been Cameron's idea. That confession changed the police's interest in me from suspicion to victimhood. Cameron was charged over the vandalism arrangement, although the academic investigation remained separate. When Natalie called to tell me, I was standing in my kitchen beside the butter dish where I had found the cuff link. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I sat on the floor and began shaking. The pressure I had kept compressed for weeks finally escaped through my hands. Natalie arrived 40 minutes later carrying soup and a loaf of bread. She did not congratulate me or say Cameron deserved what was coming. She sat against the cabinet beside me and said, "You can stop planning now." I told her I wasn't sure I knew how. She rested her shoulder against mine. "Then start with dinner." That evening marked the beginning of something neither of us was ready to name. We were not lovers, and Natalie was not a prize handed to me for surviving Lily. She was still grieving the brother she thought she had, while I was divorcing the woman I once expected to grow old beside. We met for coffee, walked around the frozen lake, and sometimes worked silently in her studio after hours. She taught me how photographers shaped darkness instead of merely eliminating it. I helped redesign her portfolio without charging her. Our closeness grew in small, almost invisible increments. A shared joke in a grocery aisle, her hand lingering on my arm after a difficult phone call. The night she fell asleep against my shoulder while we watched a terrible documentary about urban architecture. Neither of us crossed the line. Not yet. Lily noticed anyway. She appeared outside Natalie's studio one evening in April, waiting beneath the red glow of the sign across the street. When I stepped outside, she looked past me through the window and saw Natalie laughing while she packed away a camera. Lily's face changed. "So this is why you wouldn't take me back," she said. I told her Natalie and I were not together. "She helped you destroy Cameron. Cameron destroyed Cameron." "And what about me?" Lily asked. "Are you trying to destroy me too?" Before I could answer, she stepped closer and lowered her voice. "I can prove you planned all of this. If you don't stop the divorce, I'll tell the police everything." Snowmelt ran along the curb between us, black with street dirt, while Natalie watched through the studio glass. Lily believed she had finally found leverage. What she didn't know was that her next decision would expose the last secret she had been protecting, and place her medical career beside Cameron's on the same collapsing table. I asked Lily what she believed she could prove. She folded her arms and tried to hold my gaze, but her eyes kept moving toward Natalie behind the glass. "You contacted Cameron's sister, planted those folders in his office, and arranged for a reporter to find them while you hid in Chicago. That's conspiracy, Caleb." The accusation sounded rehearsed, probably assembled from fragments Cameron had fed her before he blocked her. "Did Cameron tell you that?" I asked. "It doesn't matter where I heard it. It matters if you're threatening me with a story invented by a man currently charged with paying someone to vandalize my car." Her confidence flickered. She said she had messages proving Natalie and I planned the exposure together. I knew that was impossible. Natalie and I had discussed sensitive details only in person, and the practical messages between us concerned photography work, public records, and legitimate business arrangements. We had never written that she would move the folders or contact Elise Hart. "Show me," I said. Lily unlocked her phone but did not open any messages. Instead, she whispered, "Let me move home, stop the divorce, and I won't have to show anyone." There was something almost heartbreaking about how badly she misunderstood the person I had become. For months earlier, the threat might have frightened me into protecting her. Now it only confirmed that taking her back would mean allowing betrayal to become the permanent language of our marriage. Natalie stepped outside and stood several feet behind me. She said nothing. Her presence seemed to infuriate Lily more than any answer I could have given. Lily looked at her and snapped, "You think he loves you? He's using you because he hates your brother." Natalie replied calmly, "Then it's fortunate neither of us has claimed to be in love." Lily turned back to me. "Tell her to leave. This is her studio. Then come home with me." Tonight, we can fix this before it gets worse. I felt the old instinct rise again, the reflex to calm her, guide her somewhere warm, and take responsibility for whatever happened next. I let it pass. "You are not my home anymore," I said. Lily's face crumpled, but she recovered quickly enough to tell me I would regret humiliating her. She walked away through the dirty snow, shoulders rigid, and disappeared around the corner. Natalie waited until Lily was gone, then asked, "Do you think she has anything?" "No," I said, "but she thinks she does," which means Cameron told her more than she admitted. The following morning, Marissa sent Lily's attorney a formal notice preserving all communications connected to Cameron, clinician forward, the university spreadsheet, and the threat she had made outside Natalie's studio. A security camera above the entrance had captured the conversation with clear audio. Lily's attorney responded before noon, denying that she had attempted blackmail and requesting that we avoid escalatory interpretations. Marissa almost smiled when she read it. That means her lawyer just learned about this and is furious. 2 days later, Lily requested another meeting, this time with both attorneys present. She arrived carrying a sealed envelope and looked younger than 25, like a student who had stayed awake preparing for an examination she knew she would fail. Inside the envelope were printed messages between her and Cameron. They did not prove that I had planned anything. They proved something much worse for her. 6 weeks before I caught them, Cameron had sent Lily the complete ranking spreadsheet and asked her to identify 3 classmates likely to compete with her for a surgical research placement. Lily named them. In later messages, she provided personal details one of the students had disclosed during a peer support session, including treatment for anxiety and a previous leave of absence. Cameron added that information to a confidential faculty note, used to question the student's ability to handle pressure. Another classmate lost access to a research interview after Cameron quietly described him as unreliable. Lily had not merely accepted an unfair advantage. She had helped weaken other students' chances. "Why would you print these?" her attorney asked, visibly stunned. Lily said Cameron had told her the messages demonstrated his control over the files and would somehow support her claim against me. He had manipulated her one final time, persuading her to preserve evidence of her own misconduct because he hoped she would use it to redirect the investigation. Marissa asked whether Lily intended to threaten me with those pages. Lily began crying and said she only wanted her life back. "Which life?" I asked. "The marriage you were planning to leave, the program you tried to rig, or the future Cameron promised you?" Her attorney placed a hand on her arm and advised her not to answer. The messages reached the university through the legally required investigative process, not through a public leak. Lily was suspended pending a disciplinary hearing. One of the students she had targeted filed a formal complaint after learning how her private medical information had been used. The school eventually offered Lily the option to withdraw rather than receive a permanent expulsion notation, but the result was effectively the same. Credits from parts of the program could transfer, yet any future medical institution would ask why she had left during an integrity investigation. The surgical future she had treated as inevitable disappeared in a matter of weeks. Her parents learned the full story when her father called me, confused and angry, demanding to know why I had sabotaged their daughter. I sent him only the messages she had printed herself. He called again the next day, but his voice had changed. He apologized and asked whether I believed Lily had ever truly loved me. I told him I was no longer the right person to answer. Cameron's fall was even steeper. The university terminated him after confirming unauthorized access to evaluation systems and undisclosed sexual involvement with a student under his professional influence. Several students joined a civil action alleging that Clinician Forward had sold protected information and false guarantees. His estranged wife used the findings during their divorce, and professional organizations removed him from committees that had once strengthened his reputation. The vandalism case ended with a plea agreement, probation, restitution, and a no-contact order protecting me. The academic misconduct remained the stain that followed him. He applied for teaching and consulting positions in other states, but every serious background check reached the same public record. Months later, he sent Natalie a 3-page letter blaming me, Lily, the university, his wife, and institutional jealousy. He apologized to nobody. Natalie read the first page, fed the entire letter into a paper shredder, and returned to editing a family portrait session. That was the day she stopped referring to him as her brother and began calling him Cameron. Now, I should tell you the truth about the revenge because secrecy can make an ordinary act sound more sinister than it was. Yes, I designed the circumstances. I chose the seminar because my Chicago trip gave me an airtight alibi. I placed Simon in the ballroom knowing Cameron's vanity would make him document his own presentation. I gave Natalie enough verified information to understand what her brother was doing. And I knew that once the folders became visible, Cameron would authorize an inspection rather than appear guilty by refusing. But Natalie made the anonymous call. She moved property inside an office she legally leased. Nothing was forged, stolen, or planted. For 22 minutes, police considered whether I might have engineered a crime. Then evidence showed there was no invented crime to engineer. My retaliation was making certain that the truth Cameron sold in private had an audience he could not control. If you are expecting me to say I would do everything exactly the same way, I can't. Planning his exposure kept me functional when grief might otherwise have swallowed me. But it also kept Cameron at the center of my thoughts. I checked the investigation every morning. I tracked every consequence. For a while, his destruction became another project with deadlines and deliverables. Natalie was the person who finally showed me the danger in that. One evening in early summer, she found me rereading an article about the civil lawsuit and closed my laptop. "He already lost access to your life," she said. "Stop giving him office space in your head." I laughed, but she did not. "I mean it, Caleb. We exposed what he did. If you need him to suffer every day before you let yourself be happy, he still controls the schedule." Nobody had spoken to me that directly since the affair. I deleted the alerts that night. The divorce was finalized in August. Lily received half the remaining joint funds and compensation for a limited portion of documented marital contributions, while debts tied solely to her education remained hers. She moved back to Rochester with her parents and began working in patient scheduling at a private clinic. There was dignity in honest work, and I never mocked where she ended up. The tragedy was that the life she lost had been attainable without Cameron. She had intelligence, endurance, and a husband willing to support her. What she lacked was patience with the distance between ambition and achievement. She tried to shorten that distance using betrayal, and the shortcut collapsed beneath her. Her final attempt to return came in a handwritten letter delivered with the last box of documents from her attorney. She said therapy had helped her understand that she pursued Cameron because his attention made her feel exceptional at a time when medical school made her feel ordinary. She apologized without blaming me and wrote that if I ever wanted to begin again, she would wait. It was the first apology she gave that felt complete. I read it twice, then placed it in the same file as the divorce decree. I did not respond. Forgiveness, I learned, did not require reopening the door. Natalie and I crossed that line slowly. Our first actual date took place 10 months after I found the cuff link. We went to a tiny Ethiopian restaurant, agreed not to discuss Cameron or Lily for the entire evening, and discovered how little of our connection depended on the people who introduced us through damage. She loved old mystery films, collected ugly ceramic birds, and became fiercely competitive over crossword puzzles. I talked too much whenever I was nervous. She hated raisins with an intensity that seemed ideological. Those ordinary discoveries mattered more than the dramatic secrets we already knew about each other. We dated for nearly 2 years before I proposed. I did it in Natalie's renovated studio after helping her install a permanent gallery wall. There was no crowd, no hidden photographer, and no speech designed for social media. I placed a small velvet box inside the same butter dish that had once held Cameron's cuff link, which I had cleaned and kept for reasons I didn't entirely understand until that moment. Natalie lifted the glass lid, saw the ring, and started laughing before she cried. "You're reclaiming the butter dish?" she asked. "I'm a designer. I believe in repurposing damaged objects." Then I told her that she had never rescued me, and I had never wanted her to. She had simply stood beside me until I remembered how to rescue myself. I asked whether she wanted to build a life with the man who remained. She said yes. We married the following autumn in a small brick venue overlooking the Mississippi, surrounded by 40 people and more candles than the fire marshal probably would have approved. Natalie kept her photography studio. I became creative director at my agency and later opened a small independent design practice in the rear room of our house. We built something calmer than my first marriage, not because neither of us carried scars, but because we never treated love as permission to hide the knife. Let me leave you with the lessons I earned from that winter. 1. Evidence tells a story before a liar is prepared to admit it. The cologne, the clothing on the stairs, and the chilled champagne proved that Lily's betrayal was planned long before her explanations began. 2. Supporting someone's ambition does not make you responsible for the shortcuts they choose. I helped Lily study, paid our shared expenses, and believed in her future. None of that caused her to misuse confidential information. 3. Revenge becomes dangerous when another person's suffering turns into your daily purpose. Exposing Cameron protected others, but healing began only when I stopped monitoring every consequence. 4. A sincere apology can deserve acknowledgement without earning reconciliation. Lily's final letter may have been honest, but honesty that arrives after trust is destroyed does not automatically rebuild it. 5. A healthy new relationship should become more than a reaction to an old betrayal. Natalie and I lasted because we waited until we could speak about ordinary life, not just the people who had hurt us. So tell me what choice you would have made. Comment 1 if you think arranging Cameron's exposure was justified. Comment 2 if you would have handed over the spreadsheet immediately and walked away. Or comment 3 if you believe I should have accepted Lily's final apology and given her another chance. Share where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always find it interesting how differently people judge the same decision across the world. If this story stayed with you, leave a like and subscribe for more original stories about betrayal, consequences, and rebuilding. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional patterns, fully rewritten in Minneapolis to create original content. Any resemblance to actual people or events is entirely coincidental.